archiving purposes, let me get you to say, and
It's the ghost.
it's the kitty maybe.
It's suction.
Okay, draft.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me get you to say and spell your name for us.
Okay.
Just do that. This is just for archiving purposes.
My name is Sister Mary Kuester. My last name is spelled Kuester.
Kuester.
Letter Q and stir.
Ah. So what, Kuester, what is that?
It is German,
German
and it has the derivation from the word Kirk, which means church.
How about that?
Who knew?
Wow. Well, someone did.
Someone did.
Let's see. Okay, and what are we going to say your official title is in this capacity?
At the present time, I am an art teacher in an elementary school named of Holy Family
Okay.
in North Miami.
So, did you have a life before the 11th grade?
Well, somewhat. I'm what's known as a corporation kid, so we moved a lot. I was born in Chicago, grew up in LaGrange, Illinois, moved twice there. Then my father changed companies from Swift and Company, went to Brunswick Corporation, where we moved to Muskegon, Michigan. After Muskegon, Michigan, my favorite place, we went to Florida. After 1 year in Florida, we moved to Marion, Virginia. After 1 year in Marion, Virginia, we moved back to Florida. And that's where the family sort of settled, except for a brother in Colorado.
So this whole time while you were moving, to sort of describe your family dynamics, how many siblings and all that good stuff.
I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters. I come as the 4th one, the first girl. We had to be close because of all the moves. It was kind of difficult to get used to moving so much. And I guess that kept us close. My parents' faith helped us through all this as well. So, but as we grew older, some left the church, some were asked to leave the church, and I guess that's about it.
Okay. Describe yourself, I guess, very early. What kind of girl were you? Were you a girly girl or a tomboy? Or?
Well, being the first girl, they dressed me up a lot, and there's a lost picture of me in a Dale Evans cowgirl thing, and but I turned more tomboy as I grew up. In Michigan, I would climb trees and, surf, snowboard down hills and explore creeks and things like that. When my brothers let me, I would be with them, and when they didn't let me, I would explore the forests around Muskegon. Big Black Creek, Little Creek, things like that. Find crayfish.
Oh, wow, that sounds like fun. So were you kind of into nature, or was it just the only thing to do?
Well, in Michigan, it was nature. And because kind of it was the only thing to do. And they had a lot of winter sports, and things like deer hunting was, neighbors all around us were deer hunters, and we'd see the deer hanging from their trees and stuff like that. We were into our neighbors too. I mean, my sisters would beg cookies off of our neighbors and things like that. But other than that, that's most what we did when we were kids.
So tell me a little bit about your upbringing as far as when you were introduced to sisters and that sort of that imagery and that.
Well, my first school was in LaGrange, was run by the Sisters of St. Joseph in LaGrange. And they were noted and still noted to be artists. And, but I remember holding my first picture of heaven, and I used cotton balls for the clouds and things like this, and I could remember them laughing at it. It was very childish. It was the first grade image, but they thought it was cute. And I remember going around the mother house with my grandfather, Grandfather Kuester, and walking around their grottos. They had a grotto of the Dormitation of Christ. They still have it, but the mother house is gone. They made way for low-income housing for seniors, which I think was kind of neat of them. They've since merged with 7 other congregations in the Federation and are having the difficulties of reintegrating with others that they just were introduced to. So that's kind of fits my lifestyle of going to different places, and then they had to do that as well. I'm a member of the Federation Artists group as well, so I still keep in touch with some of the sister artists from there as well. They're Mary Southard, Pat Williams, which was a sister of one of our neighbors down the block, so that was cool.
So there's a line in here where you dreamed of being famous. Define famous for you.
Well, people would go after my art. I mean, I'd be, the hungry artist up in New York doing my paintings and things like that. And it didn't work out that way for some odd reason. I was interested in the arts beginning in 8th grade. I had my first art lesson, and I remember The Girl with the Watering Can by Monet was put up by one of our teachers, and I was fascinated with the color and the lines and the shapes and things that Monet created, and the softness of it. And that started my love affair with art. And it continued in high school, and that's where I decided to study it. And I went to College Misericordia in Dallas, Pennsylvania, where I had two very good art teachers there, and studied all, painting, sculpture, enameling, printing, things like that. And I saw, it allowed me to express myself. When you're in a large family, you might get overlooked. So it was one of my own ways of expressing myself and who I was. And I'm the only artist in the family. I come from a family of scientists, a motorcycle mechanic, computer geek, chemists.
So you have your own niche.
Yeah, I found mine.
So let's talk about right now. So sort of paint a picture of a typical day, where you work, who you work with, kinds of activities.
Well, this is new for me. I've recently come from Mercy Hospital as an art therapist working with the mentally ill. And these were adults. I've been out of the classroom for about 17 years. And I chose to work with this population, the Haitian population, because of the need and because I know about the power of art. It helps to the children to think, make decisions, express themselves. And so on a typical day, I have 3 to 4 art classes, 1 to 2 religion classes, and I'm basically teaching them technique and how to develop skills that are grade level appropriate, like you were there when I was doing 1 point perspective, which is really a 6th grade, but this is their first year, so they don't know what even 1 point perspective is, and they were struggling with it. But when they got it, I got it. And then they have the plans for the main street, and I'm going to put windows and stop signs, maybe car, people maybe. And they make their own decisions. The freedom to make your own decision is a very powerful thing, and I found that out again with working with the mentally ill and with the homeless. And it's very freeing. It relaxes them, except when they get excited about what they learn. But it's a very empowering thing for a group of people, Haitians especially, that have been subservient to others and helpless in the realms of politics and in natural resources. The Haitian art form is, they can make brushes out of palm fronds. They paint on whatever they have available. The only art form that I realized that they ever had was the fanal, which is a cardboard and colored tissue paper structure of a church that they put a lamp in and use as a lantern during Christmas processions. And that is dying out in this generation that's coming up. So I'm going to reintroduce it.
So let's go back to Mercy. That must have been difficult work.
Actually, I introduced art therapy to Mercy Hospital. I went to train at Marywood University in Scranton, Pennsylvania, because I noticed when I was teaching art that some of the students would draw themselves that big on a very large sheet of paper. And I knew it was saying something, but I wanted to know what the language of art was. And it was through the study of art therapy that I have an affinity for the mentally ill. It's touched my family. And even when I was studying, it touched someone I was living with. And art therapy I found very powerful in that it allowed what couldn't be said in a visual form. And when you're working in a population like in Miami, where you have multiple languages and you don't always have the words, it would come out very strongly, what their thoughts or their thinking processes were, what was on their minds, even when they would not verbalize it to the doctors. Suicidality, sexual preoccupation, homicidality, all can come out in an art form, mostly because when you create art comes out in many levels, whether it's preconscious, conscious, or subconscious. And only a true artist who knows how to manipulate media can manipulate the art to say or to fool a therapist. But oftentimes the therapist can see the manipulation because you observe not only the behavior as they're creating, but you also process the image. So art therapy is one of my first loves.
What did you call it when you first introduced it? Was it art therapy at that time?
It was art therapy. Art therapy began after World War II to help children cope with the effects of living through a war. A person named Victor Lowenfeld was an art educator who looked at the stages of artistic development with the children, and that knowledge was used with psychology to see the relationships between mental illness and art. A very prominent art therapist right now, Dr. Carmela Tabone and Linda Gant, correlated certain aspects of art with mental illness, and you could see that, things like space usage was related to depression. Low space usage was depression. Disorganized images and bizarre images were connected with schizophrenia, and a disintegration of a schema or an organized symbol was connected with dementia and any cognitive dysfunctions. So
that's fascinating. So that first image that you described
of the little self-image
with all that blank space, so were you able to witness the growth of an individual where that sort of reversed?
Definitely. Oftentimes, whether it was through medication or through ECT, which is electric shock treatment, you would see a change. And often it was the person picking fruit from a tree directive, that if you did it before ECT and after ECT, you can see a marked difference in cognitive functioning and in affect, as seen through the artwork. And that was used by both Carmelo Tabone and Dr. Linda Gant to measure the effectiveness of ECT. When Jaco came to say, how can you see if it's any good? So, yeah, it's very fascinating. And they're still making strides in assessments and directives for art therapy to look at family dynamics, dysfunctions in the family dynamics, self-images and relationship images through things like the bird's nest drawing, which shows, is there abandonment issues? Are there close connections with the parent bird and the eggs and things like that? So I just think it's all fascinating. Okay.
I would imagine that seeing your own images or self-made images of yourself would help in dealing with your emotional issues or growing or...
Mm-hmm. Often they were able to see something about themselves. I remember working with homeless addicted clients, and I remember he was sitting down in front of his picture and saying, I'm a mess. And I think he was working through that feeling that, can I ever get better? And I had to sit with him and say, it's possible. It's very possible. This was an image that is only a moment in time of your life. Whether, in 2 weeks, you could be in a totally different space and the image would change. Art marks only a moment in time. And we have the ability to change. And art can help that.
That's great. So there's an abbreviated story here that I know I need to hear the version, the full version from you on an elderly Italian gentleman. And sort of set the stage and tell me that.
This took place before I entered, and I was one of my first jobs professionally was an activity director in a nursing home. This was kind of a low establishment. There was a main hall, and everybody would usually sit in the hall and watch people go up and down the hall. You know, I mean, when somebody died, the body would go down the main hall, and there was a potter's grave on the other side of the building. Well, there was an Italian gentleman, and he would sit in the hall and he would greet everybody every day. He had lost his legs for whatever reason. I don't know whether it was combat or diabetes or something. And he would attend all the masses that were at the nursing home. And I remember one day I walked in. I went to my office to get the activities ready for the day. He had welcomed me, and then he asked one of the nurses to take him to his room and help him into bed. And there he died, alone and without anyone to be with them. Now, I've seen many deaths in that nursing home. Some fought to die. Some accepted death. Some would fight death. But he just faded away. And I felt it was somehow wrong. He needed someone to feel that someone was there and caring about him. And that's when I made my decision to finally answer a call that started at my first communion and start exploring religious life. And that's when I went and called the parish priest and said, okay, it's time. And I had a very, very fine priest start giving me people to different congregations to look at. And it was between the Franciscans and the Sisters of St. Joseph, because the Franciscans were nature, you know. On my iPad, I have examples. We're going to be doing positive, negatives, and Zentangle design in the 8th grade, I think.
I've always heard, I think I've heard that like drawing circles, if you sit and doodle circles, it's supposed to represent something. I don't know, you have a creative mind.
No, it's
Or maybe you're just going in
coping
circles.
with boredom.
I don't know. Okay, so let's back up a little bit.
Okay, where were we?
So give us a sentence to kind of bridge things where you said, you came to that aha moment where you realized.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a sentence to describe, what that time frame was, how long it took you to.
Well, I actually called that afternoon of this man's death, and terrified that they might say yes. And so I started talking with the priest in DeLand, Florida, where we were at the time. He introduced me to, say, go explore the Sisters of St. Joseph. They're in the state of Florida. And I was kind of scared because I grew up with the Sisters of St. Joseph in LaGrange, and they were, well, they were very strict. I'm putting it nicely. And
And how old were you now?
I was
Were you
20 or so.
Okay.
So I started corresponding with them, and they invited me to meet them, and I did. And then they said, let's get to know each other. So I made the decision to move to St. Augustine, and I rented an apartment above a lawyer's office across the street from the police station, and lived there for about a year. They introduced me that they needed an art teacher in the grade schools, and I started teaching art there, not having ever taught in my life. At the end of the year, I apologized to every student that I didn't know what I was doing, so hopefully you learned something. But it took me about a year to be comfortable with them. And then I entered the following year. So it was difficult in that I told my father started crying. He wouldn't say anything to me for about a week, but then he started making jokes about nuns, and I knew that he was feeling much better. So, and he enjoyed teasing the nuns after I entered. So there's Sister Christopher Marie, loved him. He had the voice, deep voice. It's like thunder rolling around the mountains. He was from Denver himself. His ancestors came from Germany and settled in the Rockies, and that's where I have a brother right now in Boulder. So, but I first felt my vocation when I made my first communion in LaGrange. In those days, you had to fast for 3 hours. This is going back before you could receive communion. And I remember my father lifting me up out of bed and carrying me down to breakfast. And but it was raining. It rained the entire day. One of the worst storms ever. So we all gathered in our little white outfits and veils in the school. And that's when I found out there really is a tunnel between the school and the rectory. Really? And that's how, well, you never heard of those rumors that there's tunnels between the convent and the, well, there really was. It's up north, and if you needed to get to some place, you didn't want to go outside in the snow and the sleet, and you used the tunnel. And at the elevation of the host, there was a brilliant flash of light and thunder immediately. And it was like, oh, God's talking. And that's when I felt the closest, feeling very close to Jesus in that particular moment that I was about to receive him for the first time.
Talk about the impact that you see every day that the Sisters of St. Joseph have on this community that you're in. And
You're talking Miami, not this. Okay.
Well, You can localize it, and then if you have any thoughts about, regionally, that's fine.
The Sisters of St. Joseph have been a major part in the state of Florida for many years, and when I entered, there were many more sisters than there are now. I think the major impact that they've had is on relationships with people. In that in these drawing people to the church, they used their spirituality, their goodness to bring people together, whether neighbor with neighbor or neighbor with God. And that has a history here in Miami, not only because of the hospital, but of the schools that we used to serve here. I mean, we had St. Teresa, St. Mary's Cathedral, Peter and Paul, probably more than I know that happened before me. But people remember that. People, I think they liked the gentleness that we fostered when working with others. I know people from the hospital miss us, and I kind of miss them too. And because we're not, as a sisters, we're not work focused, we're not focused on making money, we're focused on creating unity through hearts, through spirit. And I think that's what's lacking in our society today. The corporation has brought about a community that focuses on maintaining itself, bringing in money, and if you're no longer needed, you're let go. And that's not what we focus on. The needs of the people, bringing them what is needed, and not only in physical needs, but spiritual and emotional as well.
There's so much work immediately at hand. What do you see, or if you ever think about the future of the sisters, do you see that transitioning? Do you see, because looking at the original 6 and then 8 that came over, you sort of see this death and resurrection, this reinvention that the sisters go through in finding their next opportunity.
Well, for me, the needs that I see are the emotional needs. The lepers of our time are the mentally ill. And they're being ignored. Lack of funding for the mentally ill, the lack of services and integrated services because they need integrated services. The lack of connecting. I'm a corporation kid. I know what it's like to be isolated, to go from place to place, and if you don't have something like the welcome wagon that they had in LaGrange, you'll never know who you live with. And it was hopefully it's the church that brings that about again in a pastoral sense. It's not to maintain the church, it's to build the church. And not because of creating castles of churches. It's to create relationships among its members. I think we are starving for relationships, not only among each other, but with God as well. And part of it, today we were talking about Trinity, and in Trinity, it's about relationships. And there are times when we are going through stuff and our faith is being tested. And I was telling him the time my father sat with me for about 5 hours when I learned that my confirmation sponsor, whom I love dearly, was killed in a car crash on Christmas Day. And I questioned God about that, and he sat with me and he talked about religion, and I said, that is the most important thing you can do, is to be with someone, especially when they're going through something. You don't have to say a word. You just be. And that is what I think my ministry is, as a sister of St. Joseph. I can be a terrible teacher. I can be a good teacher. I can understand what they're going through. I cannot understand going through, but being there, trying to be the best person I can be, and maybe modeling that is the greatest gift I can give, and to listen to them.
What about the future?
Future? I don't know. The future is in God's hands. If we continue as we are, we will die. But if we do not explore, if we do not allow for differences, if we do not accept people where they are, because in these days we come with a lot of baggage, and if we don't reconnect again, we will die. I hope not. But this is a time of change and of new beginnings, and it probably will not be the same. I hope that we don't go for the big castles. I knew one community up north that they started living in low-income apartment buildings with the poor and trying to make neighbors with that. And I thought, that's it. I valued my time very much with Camillus and working with the homeless there. They taught me more about being blessed than I would have ever learned in a school setting or in any other institutional settings, even though they are an institution themselves. These brothers went to the most needy and the most neglected in the city and met their needs. And I don't think that in any relationship it's one way. It's not the sisters imposing on other people. It's us learning from the people of God as well. So if we are open, we will grow. If we are not, we will not. And it's all up to God and us. So
That was a great answer.
It is great, because that's the hard truth.
Yeah.
You know?
Being open. That was an excellent answer.
that's why I'm excited about this drop-in center.
Yes.
And I hope sisters are getting interested in it, especially our retired sisters, because
Rich, do you know what she's talking about? I'm gonna give a little bit of background, but
Give
I
it,
want Sister Mary
so I
to
can-
talk about it.
Okay.
In this year, for many years, ministry in St. Augustine that was called a Center for Women and Children.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a drop-in center.
Mhm.
And for reasons I don't know, it never got off the ground.
Well, there's so much you have to do, and, you know, zoning and
Right.
things like that.
And they were given some property
Mhm.
with no strings. And it's in a location that's
Kind
in
of
a low income. Yeah.
outskirts,
Right,
low
in
income.
low-income area. And Sister Carolyn has put a team together of sisters and some lay people, and they want to, it looks as though this dream is gonna come true. That we are going to build a center in St. Augustine
Mhm.
that will be for women and children. It's not a homeless shelter, it's not a
Right.
shelter.
Right.
It's a place they can come and maybe just get respite from the heat and
Mhm.
sit,
Mhm.
Eat,
eat,
Mhm.
learn to cook, learn to crochet, let
wash
children
their
wash
clothes.
their clothes, take a shower.
Right. Get resources.
Right, right.
Well, it's not a connection service. It's,
Okay.
you know, there's a lot of different types of drop-in centers.
Okay.
There's some for vets, there's some for the mentally ill, where they're not in a hospital setting and being judged and things like that.
Right.
This is more connecting, making connections and relaxing under the stresses of the day.
Okay.
And it's an interesting property because it used to be have stables and an old Spanish designed house which is falling apart. But it can allow for our sisters who are retired to reconnect. When we have the Lourdes, and Lourdes is our retirement center, and you know, people don't want to go there because it's a place where you die, and it shouldn't be that way. It's just reconnecting, and not as, you know, driving ourselves crazy as those of us in the ministry now, where we're going here, there, and everywhere, but at a slower pace, still connecting with the people they used to serve or could serve now, and feel needed.
I want you to draw a connection between the genesis of this project that we're getting ready to do and the sisters coming to St. Augustine in the first place.
Okay, hold on.
Are you seeing what I'm talking about?
Not yet.
Okay.
Give me a moment.
The original 8 sisters came to meet a need.
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
150 years ago. Now, we got a group of, I think, 8 people who are,
oh, okay.
you see what I'm
Gotcha.
saying?
I see
That
what you're saying.
Your charism is being renewed, kind of a thing, is what I see. So
Basically,
hit it with words.
the sisters who came to St. Augustine were called because Bishop Farreau had a lot of free slaves who needed an education. So he asked for 8 sisters to come from Le Puy, France, and help him educate these black children, black adults. And now the needs have changed. We're in a highly industrial, commercial, corporate world where stress is increasing as we deal with so many things. The family is being stretched. And this ministry, this drop-in center, can help, I think, relieve the stress, help support the family when there is a need. You know, my mother had a child who was born with a major birth defect, and she had little resources. She but being a social worker herself, she would find her resources and make connections. But there are those people out there who, if they have a child who has a major birth defect, don't know where to go, what to do. They're handling it themselves without little knowledge of how to handle it. And I think, if you have these places that they can go to and get support, it's a major, major deal for them.
So it would be, we're gonna do this again. I'm gonna get you to do this one more time, I think. So it would be specifically which sisters who would facilitate at this center.
That's in the making. That's whether.
Who are you looking at?
Well, Sister Carolyn Tucker is really spearheading it. She's also she's gone to Kansas to look at a drop-in center started by Sisters of St. Joseph there. Sister Diane, another social worker and artist, is involved in this. Sister Ann Kuhn, who else is in this? I can't think of. I'm interested in it as well.
I think you've named everybody on the committee.
Yeah, but what's neat is they have these wonderful women in St. Augustine whom they worked with before that are interested and go-getters, and we're working with them just as much as ourselves in getting this thing started and running. I can't wait till they weed whack the place and see what's there. It's just so overgrown. We don't know. There's probably buildings hiding in the weeds.
Right.
So.
But I want you to talk about how you're going around what because when the sisters came in, to teach the children, it was because